After 8 years in my house, my son won $45 million in the lottery. That same evening, his wife threw my things out on the street. Get out. We have a different life now. My son said nothing. I smiled. Did you see whose name is on the ticket? Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I had lived in that house for 8 years before everything changed. 8 years of folding laundry that wasn't mine, cooking Sunday dinners for people who stopped saying thank you somewhere around year 3. 8 years of watching my son Daniel become a stranger in his own kitchen, or maybe in his own skin. I'm not sure which happened first. My name is Margaret Collins. Most people call me Margie. I'm 68 years old, a retired school teacher from Columbus, Ohio, and I moved into Daniel's house after my husband, Gerald, passed. That was 2016. Daniel had insisted, "Mom, you can't rattle around in that house alone," he'd said, and I believed him, because he was my son, and I still believed most of what he said back then. The house was in Clearwater, Florida, a sensible ranch-style home on Pelican Drive, with a screened porch and a lemon tree in the backyard that never produced quite enough lemons. Daniel worked in insurance. His wife Jennifer worked in medical billing. They had no children, which I never commented on, because I was raised not to pry. Jennifer had made it quietly clear from the beginning that my presence was provisional. She never said it outright. She didn't have to. It was in the way she rearranged the kitchen after I organized it, in the way she introduced me to her friends. Daniel's mother. She's staying with us for now. For now. I filed that phrase away like a library card. For most of those 8 years, I made myself useful and small. I paid $300 a month toward utilities. Not rent, Daniel had said, just to help out. I babysat their 2 cats when they traveled. I weeded the garden and kept my room tidy, and did not complain when Jennifer repainted the guest bathroom, a color she described as spa taupe, and I would have described as the inside of a cardboard box. But in the last year before the lottery, something had shifted. I felt it the way you feel weather changing. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small atmospheric adjustments. Jennifer had started making comments about space, about how it might be nice for Daniel and her to have room to breathe. She'd begun CCing Daniel on emails about retirement communities in the area, then leaving the browser open on her laptop when I walked past. She never looked up from the screen. She didn't need to. Daniel said nothing. That was the thing about Daniel. He had a talent for saying nothing at precisely the moment when something needed to be said. The lottery ticket happened on a Thursday in October. I had been to the Publix on Gulf to Bay Boulevard for milk and bread. Ordinary things. Ordinary afternoon. I had $7 left over from the cash I'd taken out for groceries, and on an impulse I couldn't entirely explain, I stopped at the lottery machine near the exit. I'd played maybe 4 times in my life. Gerald used to buy scratch tickets at Christmas as stocking stuffers, but this was different. A Mega Millions draw jackpot at $45 million. I fed my $7 into the machine and took the ticket home and put it in the small ceramic dish on my nightstand, where I kept my reading glasses and a spare house key. I forgot about it for 3 days. It was Daniel who checked it. He'd been on his phone at the breakfast table on Sunday morning, and I'd mentioned offhandedly that I had a ticket from Thursday's draw. He looked it up. I watched his face go through several expressions I'd never seen on it before, cycling through them so fast they almost blurred together. Shock, then something electric, then a careful blankness that settled over his features like a curtain being drawn. "How much?" I asked. He turned the phone to show me. $45 million. $200,000. I sat down. The kitchen chair scraped the tile and the sound was very loud. By Sunday evening, Jennifer knew. By Sunday evening, my suitcases were on the front porch. I hadn't packed them. I want to be clear about that. I came out of my bedroom to find 2 rolling bags and a cardboard box sitting on the porch concrete in the October humidity, my blouses visible through the mesh pocket of the larger bag. Jennifer stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, and she said, with a composure that told me she had rehearsed it, "It's time for you to find your own place, Margaret. We have a different life now." Daniel stood behind her. He was looking at the lemon tree. I looked at them both for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not the smile of a woman who has been defeated, but the smile of a woman who just remembered something important. "Did either of you," I said, "happen to look at whose name is on that ticket?" Jennifer's composure flickered. Just once. Just for a second. But that second told me everything I needed to know. I spent that first night at the Comfort Inn on US 19. I paid with my Visa debit card, the one attached to the small checking account I'd maintained in my own name since Gerald died, the one Jennifer didn't know about, because Jennifer assumed, as entitled people often do, that she knew the full dimensions of everyone around her. I took a room on the second floor, set my suitcases inside the door, and sat on the edge of the bed in my coat because I hadn't taken it off yet, and my hands were shaking too much to manage buttons. I want to tell you I was angry. Anger would have been clean, useful, like a good pair of scissors. What I felt was more complicated than that. There was fear, a cold, specific fear, the kind that lives in the body rather than the mind, that says you are 68 years old and your suitcases are in a motel on a Tuesday, and you do not know what comes next. There was grief, because Daniel was my son, and I had changed his diapers and sat with him through 3 broken bones and a case of pneumonia in 1993, and he had watched Jennifer put my belongings on the porch and turn to look at a lemon tree. That was its own kind of loss, specific and hard-edged. But underneath the fear and the grief, there was something else, something quieter. The ticket was in my coat pocket. I had taken it from the ceramic dish on my nightstand when I packed, automatically without thinking, the way you take your keys when you leave the house. It was a habit of self-preservation I hadn't known I had until I needed it. I took it out and held it under the bedside lamp. Margaret E. Collins. The machine had printed it on the back when I'd fed in the quick pick request, along with the date and the draw number. In Florida, lottery tickets are bearer instruments. Whoever presents the ticket collects the prize. But the name printed on the back creates a legal record. I knew this because Gerald had been a careful man and had taught me to read fine print, and I had spent 30 years teaching 11-year-olds to read carefully and ask questions. I asked myself the question I should have asked the moment Daniel's face went blank. What exactly do they think is going to happen here? Did they imagine I would simply, what? Accept displacement? Hand over a $45 million ticket to keep the peace? I turned that possibility over in my mind the way you turn over a rock to see what's underneath. And what I found underneath was this. Yes. That is precisely what they imagined. They had known me for 8 years as a woman who paid her $300 a month and reorganized the kitchen and kept her opinions quiet. And they had mistaken that restraint for helplessness. Jennifer had calculated that a 68-year-old widow, suddenly homeless and overwhelmed, would fold. It was, I had to admit, not an unreasonable calculation. It was also completely wrong. I slept 4 hours. At 7 in the morning, I walked down to the motel's complimentary breakfast, watery scrambled eggs, a bagel, orange juice in a plastic cup. And I ate with the deliberate attention of someone who is preparing for a long day. Then I went back to my room and made a list. First, secure the ticket. I drove to a SunTrust Bank branch on Missouri Avenue and rented a safe deposit box. I placed the ticket inside, along with a handwritten note documenting the date of purchase, the store location, and the fact that I had used my own cash. The $7 remaining from my grocery money, drawn from my personal checking account 2 days prior. I had the ATM receipt. I put that in the box, too. Second, legal counsel. I did not know a lottery attorney, but I knew how to use the Florida Bar's online referral service, and by 10:30, I had an appointment for the following morning with a man named Robert Ashworth, who specialized in financial litigation and had, according to his firm's website, handled 3 previous lottery disputes in the state of Florida. His office was in Tampa. I wrote the address in my notebook in capital letters. Third, documentation. Back at the motel, I sat at the small desk and wrote out, by hand, a timeline of the previous 72 hours. The purchase, the drawer, Daniel's face, Jennifer's words at the door, the suitcases, the time. I included the names of the Publix employees I remembered. I noted that Jennifer had used the phrase, "We have a different life now," rather than asking me to leave, which suggested she already considered the money hers. I wrote 4 pages. I was not panicking. I realized with some surprise, completely calm. The fear hadn't disappeared. It was still there, a low hum in the background. But I had given it something to do. Fear becomes manageable when it has a task. I called my daughter-in-law's bluff in the only language that mattered. I called a lawyer. Whatever Jennifer thought she was doing when she put my suitcases on the porch, she had made one critical error. She had moved too fast. She had pushed me out of the house before anyone had claimed the ticket, before any legal steps had been taken, while my name was still the only one attached to those numbers. She had handed me 72 hours and an empty safe deposit box. I intended to use both. Robert Ashworth's office occupied the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Tampa, with a view of the Hillsborough River that I noticed and then deliberately ignored because I had not come to look at scenery. He was a compact man in his mid-50s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the manner of someone who had heard a great many extraordinary stories and believed almost none of them until proven otherwise. I respected that immediately. I laid everything on his conference table: the ATM receipt, my handwritten timeline, the safe deposit box receipt, photographs I'd taken that morning of the Publix lottery terminal with my phone, which showed the machine I had used and its location in the store, and the single most important item, a screenshot from my bank's mobile app showing the withdrawal of $40 on Thursday, the grocery run, and the grocery receipt I had found at the bottom of my purse showing the total and the change. $7. That was the thread. $7 in cash, remaining after I paid for milk and bread and a small container of Greek yogurt, spent at a lottery machine at 2:47 in the afternoon. My name on the ticket. My money. Ashworth looked at everything for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Has anyone else touched this ticket?" "No." "Has it been presented to the Florida Lottery Commission?" "Not yet." He leaned back. "Then you're in a strong position, Mrs. Collins. Florida law treats lottery tickets as the property of the purchaser. Your name is on the ticket, your funds purchased it, and you have documentary evidence of both. Unless someone produces a signed agreement stating that the ticket was purchased jointly or on behalf of another party, this is yours." He paused. "Is there any such agreement?" I almost laughed. "Jennifer doesn't make agreements. She makes pronouncements." He made a note. "I'd like to file for a temporary injunction today, preventing anyone from claiming or transferring this ticket except you. It's a precautionary measure. Essentially a legal flag that says, "This asset is under dispute, hands off." We can also notify the Florida Lottery that the ticket is pending legal review, so no claim can be processed without your attorney present. I said yes to both. Walking out of that building at noon, I felt the ground under my feet differently. Not triumphant, it was too early for that, but solid, purposeful. I had gone from a woman standing on a motel balcony with a lemon tree view and 4 pages of handwritten notes to a woman with legal representation, a protective injunction in progress, and an appointment the following week to formally claim the ticket with counsel present. What I didn't know was that Daniel had called the Florida Lottery's winner hotline at 9 that morning. I found out later, piecing it together from the attorney's communications and what Daniel himself eventually admitted, that he had called using the ticket numbers, which he had photographed on his phone before I'd taken the ticket from the nightstand. He'd been told the ticket had not yet been claimed and that he was welcome to present it at the Tampa prize office. He had not mentioned that the ticket was not in his possession. He had not mentioned my name. He had asked about the process for a family member claiming on behalf of the winner, and the representative, following standard protocol, had given him general information that he apparently interpreted as a roadmap. I learned about this phone call because my attorney learned about it. Because when Ashworth's office filed the injunction that afternoon, they flagged the ticket number with the lottery's legal department, who cross-referenced inquiries and found Daniel's call logged that same morning. Ashworth called me at 4:30. "Mrs. Collins," he said, and his voice had a new quality. Not alarm exactly, but a sharpened attention. "Your son made contact with the lottery this morning before our filing. He inquired about claiming procedures. I want you to understand what this means." He paused. "It means this is no longer a family misunderstanding. This is an attempted claim dispute. And it means whoever advised them, and someone advised them, Mrs. Collins, because that call followed a very specific line of questioning, knows what they're doing." I sat in my motel room with the phone against my ear and thought about Jennifer. Jennifer, who worked in medical billing and understood systems and forms and the language of institutions. Jennifer, who had repainted the guest bathroom spa taupe and introduced me as Daniel's mother. She's staying with us for now. Jennifer, who had stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and spoken with the composure of a woman who had rehearsed. She hadn't just pushed me out in a moment of greed. She had a plan. The difference between us, I realized, was that she had been planning in the days before. I had started planning in the hours after, but I had something she didn't. I had the ticket. I had my name. And I had documentation of a phone call made by a man who did not own what he was trying to claim, logged in the Florida Lottery's own system at 9:14 in the morning, 2 hours before my attorney filed papers that made any further attempt legally actionable. Point of no return, for both of us, but especially for them. That evening, I drove to the Publix on Gulf to Bay Boulevard. I went to the customer service desk and asked if they kept surveillance footage. The manager, a young woman named Destiny, according to her name tag, told me they retained 30 days of footage. I gave her my card, told her my attorney would be in touch, and asked her as politely as I knew how not to erase Thursday afternoon. She looked at me with the particular alertness of someone who is watching something important happen. "I won't," she said. The formal claim process took place on a Wednesday, 11 days after Jennifer had stood in my doorway and told me I was no longer welcome in the life her husband's money was going to buy. Except it wasn't his money, and she knew it now. Robert Ashworth had prepared everything with the precision of a man who understood that lottery claims at this dollar amount would be scrutinized by attorneys on every side and by the lottery's own legal team. We arrived at the Florida Lottery District office in Tampa at 9 o'clock. Ashworth, his paralegal Sandra, and me in a charcoal blazer I had bought at a Kohl's the previous Friday, because I believed that a woman claiming $45 million should not do so in a cardigan. I had the ticket. I had the documentation. I had a brief, clear statement of claim. We were there for 3 hours. There were forms, verification procedures, identity checks, a review of the injunction filing. The lottery's legal representative was a measured woman named Patricia Huang, who asked careful questions and received careful answers. At no point did she seem surprised by any of it. I gathered she had seen disputes before. When we walked out at noon, the claim was filed. The ticket was registered in my name. The funds, pending a standard multi-week processing period, were designated for transfer to an account in my name alone. The injunction had done its work. Daniel's inquiry had been flagged and set aside. He had no legal standing. He had never had any. Ashworth drove me back to my car. Before I got out, he said, "They'll respond to this, Mrs. Collins. Today or tomorrow. Be prepared." "I know," I said. They called that evening. Daniel called first. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard since he was 17, and had dented Gerald's car and was trying to decide whether to confess or construct a story. It was the voice of a man caught between two women, and I recognized it, the way you recognize a piece of furniture from your childhood, with a kind of tired familiarity. "Mom." Just that at first. Then, "We need to talk about this." "We can talk," I said. "My attorney's number is on your phone now. You can have your attorney call his attorney." A silence. Then Jennifer's voice. She had been listening. Of course she had been listening. "Margaret." The composure from the doorway was still there, but thinner, like a coat worn one season too long. "We want to resolve this as a family. Nobody needs lawyers. We just want to sit down and—" "You put my suitcases on the porch," I said. "That was your resolution." Another silence, longer this time. What came next did not come that evening. It came 2 days later, on a Friday afternoon, in the parking lot of the Comfort Inn, where I had been staying long enough that the front desk clerk greeted me by name. A man I didn't recognize approached me as I was carrying groceries from my car. A man in his 40s, in a polo shirt, carrying a manila envelope, with the practiced ease of someone who delivers bad news for a living. He handed me the envelope. Inside was a document claiming that I had been living in Daniel and Jennifer's home as a dependent, that they had financially supported me for 8 years, that the grocery money in question had originated from a household account they jointly maintained, and that therefore the lottery ticket represented a jointly held asset. It was signed by an attorney. It was, my own attorney later told me, not entirely without legal creativity, though it was substantially without factual basis. Attached to the document was a handwritten note in Jennifer's handwriting. It said, "Don't make this ugly, Margaret. You have enough to live on. Take a settlement and everyone walks away clean." I read the note twice in the parking lot, standing between my car and a concrete pillar, a bag of groceries in my other hand. The settlement figure she had in mind was not specified. It didn't need to be. The message was the point. You are old and alone and outmatched, and the sensible thing is to take what we offer. I put the note back in the envelope. I called Ashworth. I read him the attached document over the phone. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They've hired Phil Dermott. He's aggressive, and he's expensive, and he knows his way around civil litigation." Another pause. "But their core claim is weak, Mrs. Collins. They're going to have to prove that household funds paid for that ticket. Your bank records show a personal withdrawal. Their grocery account. Do they have a joint grocery account?" "Jennifer managed the groceries," I said. "I contributed cash, monthly." "Do you have records of those contributions?" "I have 11 months of Venmo transactions to Daniel's account, labeled household contribution. A beat. Mrs. Collins, Ashworth said, with the careful admiration of a man who does not often compliment clients. You are very well organized. I took the weekend to rest. I drove to St. Pete Beach on Saturday and sat in a folding chair I bought at a drugstore and put my feet in the Gulf of Mexico. And I watched a pelican stand on a piling for 45 minutes without moving. And I thought about Gerald, who had loved pelicans, and I let myself feel everything that had happened without trying to organize it into a list. Sunday, I went to church, a small Episcopal congregation near the motel, and a woman named Dolores sat next to me and shared her hymnal without being asked, and that small, ordinary kindness made me cry in a way that Jennifer's cruelty had not. On Monday, I called Ashworth and told him to proceed. The temptation came on a Tuesday, and it was more sophisticated than I had expected. Jennifer was smarter than I had given her credit for, which was itself a mistake I had been making for 8 years. I had mistaken her coldness for shallowness, her ambition for mere vanity. She was neither shallow nor vain. She was strategic, and she had spent 11 days recalibrating. She came alone, without Daniel, which was its own signal. She drove to the motel and knocked on my door at 11 in the morning, and when I opened it, she was holding a paper coffee cup from a place called Morning Tide, which she knew I liked because I had mentioned it once, 18 months ago, on a drive we had taken together to pick up Daniel's dry cleaning. She had remembered that. She had meant for me to notice that she remembered it. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "Can I come in?" I looked at her for a moment. This woman I had watched grow more confident in her own cruelty across 8 years, who had stood in a doorway with crossed arms and told me to leave. And I stepped aside. We sat in the 2 chairs at the small table by the window. She put her coffee down and folded her hands on the table with the deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed their body language. "I want to apologize," she said, "for how that night went. The way I spoke to you was wrong. We were overwhelmed. The news, the number, it was a shock." She looked at me with an expression of measured vulnerability. "I know I've been difficult to live with. I know I haven't always been welcoming, and I'm sorry." I said nothing. I let the apology sit between us and looked at the St. Pete beach line, visible through the window, where the morning was very blue and very clear. "The thing is," she continued, with a careful pivot that she perhaps thought I wouldn't notice, $45 million is the kind of thing that can destroy a family. We've both seen it happen to other people. And Daniel—" Her voice shifted, softer now, the approach of a woman bringing in her most reliable piece. "Daniel is devastated. He doesn't sleep. He thinks he's lost his mother. He watched you put my things on the porch," I said. "He looked at the lemon tree. She absorbed this. He was in shock. He's not the same person he was that night." "Which person is he now?" She paused, and I saw the calculation behind her eyes, the tiny adjustment of someone moving a chess piece. "He wants to see you. He misses you. We both do." She opened her purse and took out an envelope, which she placed on the table between us without fanfare, as though it were simply a practical item being passed along. "There's a number in there, a real number. Comfortable for life money, Margaret. More than you'd ever spend. We'd buy you a beautiful condo, set up a trust, handle the taxes. You'd never worry about anything again." I looked at the envelope. I didn't touch it. Here is what I felt in that moment. I felt the temptation, which would be dishonest to deny. Not the money. I had the money. My name was on the ticket. I didn't need their offer. What I felt was the older, deeper temptation, the one built into every mother who has loved an imperfect child for 44 years. The temptation to make the peace, to take the path that looked like resolution, to stop the machinery I had set in motion, which was expensive and exhausting, and which would, one way or another, end whatever remained of my relationship with my son. I sat with that temptation for exactly as long as it deserved. Then I thought about the porch, the suitcases, the blouses visible through the mesh pocket, the lemon tree. "Tell your attorney to call mine," I said. I stood up, picked up her envelope without opening it, and handed it back to her. "And take your coffee. It'll get cold." She looked at me for a long moment with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not anger, not contempt, but something more unsettled. She had come in holding the coffee and the memory of morning tide and the soft mention of Daniel's sleeplessness, and none of it had worked, and she wasn't sure what to do next. She left without saying anything else. From my window, I watched her cross the parking lot. She walked slowly, which told me she was thinking. She sat in her car for 3 minutes before she drove away, which told me she was shaken. I called Linda Pierce that afternoon. Linda had been my closest friend since we'd taught 5th grade together in Columbus 20 years ago. She lived in Sarasota now, 40 minutes south, and she arrived at the motel at 4 o'clock with a casserole dish, a bottle of Riesling, and the particular energy of a woman who has been waiting to be useful. She sat across from me while I told her everything, from the lottery terminal at Publix to Jennifer's coffee and the envelope I had handed back. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she refilled my glass and said, "Margie, you know what you're doing is right." "I know," I said. "Do you?" She looked at me steadily. "Because you've got that look you used to get when a parent challenged a student's grade. Like you're sure, but you're bracing." I thought about that. I suppose I'm bracing for what comes next. "What comes next is they get ugly," Linda said. "And then you win." She stayed 3 days. We walked on the beach. We played gin rummy. We drove to a farmer's market in Dunedin where a man sold Meyer lemon marmalade, and I bought 4 jars, because sometimes a thing means something, and you let it. Linda told me about her garden, about her new neighbor, about a book she'd read. She talked about ordinary life with the generosity of someone who understood that ordinary life was precisely what I needed to remember existed. When she left on Friday morning, she hugged me in the parking lot for a long time. "Call me every day," she said. I did. They came together the second time, which told me the first approach had been evaluated and found insufficient. Daniel called that Saturday morning to ask if they could meet with me. Not at the motel this time, but at a restaurant, neutral ground, somewhere public. The choice of venue was Jennifer's idea, I was certain. Public spaces imposed behavioral constraints that she calculated would work in her favor. They would seem reasonable, moderate, civilized, and I would be less likely to make a scene. She did not understand that I had no intention of making a scene. Scenes were not my instrument. I chose the time and place, a diner on Drew Street that I had eaten breakfast in twice during the previous week, and whose corner booth I had specifically identified as offering clear sightlines to both the entrance and the parking lot. I arrived 15 minutes early. I had my phone charged and my attorney's number queued. I ordered coffee and read 3 pages of the novel I was carrying before they walked in. Daniel looked worn. I will say that honestly. He was thinner than I remembered, which was strange given that it had been less than 3 weeks, and he held his shoulders in the way he had as a teenager when he had done something he couldn't undo. He slid into the booth across from me, and Jennifer sat beside him. And for a moment we simply looked at each other across a laminate table with a small plastic menu holder and a ceramic sugar dispenser. "Mom," Daniel said. His voice cracked slightly on the word. I had prepared myself for this. A mother's love for her son is not a light switch. I want to be honest about what it cost me, sitting across from him in that diner, to feel the pull of 44 years of love and then hold my position anyway. It cost something. I am not a woman made of stone. I'm listening, I said. Jennifer had dressed carefully, not formally, which would have seemed threatening, but warmly, in a rust-colored blouse and small gold earrings. She had calculated her presentation to the last detail, and I noted each detail with the thoroughness of a woman who had spent 30 years teaching children to pay attention. What followed was a performance. I use that word not pejoratively, but accurately. It was structured, it had a beginning and a middle and a designed emotional arc, and it had been rehearsed. Daniel spoke first. About family, about regret, about how they'd let the shock of the moment override their judgment. He used the phrase, "in sickness and in health," with a slight fumble that told me he'd intended a different phrase and lost it. He talked about the guest bathroom. He said he thought of the house as my home too. He said, "We want you to come back," with an earnestness that I might have believed entirely if I hadn't been watching Jennifer's hands, which were folded on the table with a stillness that didn't match the emotion in his voice. Then the shift. Jennifer reached into her bag and produced a document, a single sheet, folded in thirds. She placed it on the table and smoothed it flat with her palm. "We had this drawn up," she said, with the tone of someone presenting a generous gift, "because we want this to be official, fair, in writing." I looked at the document without touching it. It was an agreement, a family settlement, it called itself, in which I would receive $8 million, held in a trust administered jointly by Daniel and a trustee of their choosing, dispersed in annual installments for my care and comfort. In exchange, I would withdraw the legal claim and reconvey the lottery ticket to Daniel Collins. $8 million out of 45 in installments under their administration. And there it was, the mask, briefly lifted. Not the reconciliation they had performed across 12 minutes of careful conversation, but the transaction they had been building toward since the moment Daniel's face went blank at the breakfast table. The coffee from Morning Tide had been the soft version. This was the hard version wearing the soft version's clothes. I looked at Daniel. He was looking at the document, not at me. "Daniel," I said quietly, "look at me." He did, and to his credit and his shame, he couldn't hold my eyes. "You were 4 years old," I said, "when you had pneumonia, 104 fever for 2 days. I sat next to your bed the entire time. I counted your breaths." I paused. "I just want to know that you remember that I am your mother, not an obstacle, not a transaction." He said nothing. His jaw worked. Jennifer's composure cracked just slightly at the edges, and what was underneath wasn't warmth. It was frustration, and it was cold. "Margaret." Her voice had dropped its warmth entirely. "You are 68 years old. This case will take years. It will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The stress alone." She let the sentence complete itself with a pause, which was the most honest thing she'd said all morning. "Is that a concern for my health?" I asked. "Or a projection?" She sat back. The mask was fully off now. Her eyes were flat and entirely focused, and she was no longer performing. "Take the settlement, Margaret. You'll be comfortable. You'll have a relationship with your son. What you're doing right now destroys everything." "What I'm doing," I said, "is claiming what is mine." She pushed back her chair and stood, and Daniel did the same, and I saw something pass across her face. Not defeat, not yet, but the acknowledgement that this approach, too, had failed, and that she was running out of calibrated options and would soon be left with only uncalibrated ones. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You made yours on the porch," I replied. They left. I sat in the corner booth and finished my coffee, which had gone lukewarm, and I watched their car pull out of the parking lot. Then I took out my phone and called Ashworth and described the settlement document in detail. And I felt it. A thread of fear. Not the disabling kind, but the clean kind. The kind that tells you the stakes are real, that what you are fighting for is real, that this woman across the table was not finished. Jennifer would not stop. She would escalate. She would do things I hadn't anticipated, and some of them would be unpleasant, and I would have to stand through all of it. That fear sat in my chest on the drive back to the motel, and I let it stay there, because it reminded me of exactly what I was protecting. Everything Gerald and I had built across 40 years. My name on a lottery ticket. The right to decide what happened next. That fear was not my enemy. It was my compass. The deposition was scheduled for a Thursday, 6 weeks after the claim filing. By that point, Ashworth had built a case of considerable structural integrity. The public surveillance footage had been preserved and reviewed. It showed me, clearly and alone, at the lottery terminal at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday in October, purchasing a ticket with cash. It showed no one else. There was no Daniel, no Jennifer, no indication of anyone directing or accompanying me. There was simply a 68-year-old woman in a green cardigan making an unremarkable purchase. There were my bank records showing the $40 withdrawal that morning and the corresponding grocery receipt. There were 11 months of Venmo contributions to Daniel's account, all labeled, all dated, all demonstrating that my household contributions came from my personal account, not, as their attorney Phil Dermott had argued, from a shared household fund that might conceivably give the household a claim on purchases made with its funds. There was the Florida Lottery's own record of Daniel's phone call at 9:14 a.m. on a Sunday, after he'd seen the ticket before I'd spoken to an attorney, in which he had made inquiries about claiming procedures without disclosing that the ticket belonged to someone else. And there was one additional piece of evidence, which I had not known about until Ashworth's investigator found it 12 days before the deposition. Jennifer had searched Lottery Ticket Ownership Dispute Florida on her phone at 8:42 p.m. on the Saturday before Daniel called the lottery on Sunday morning. The search history had been recovered through a process I didn't fully understand, but trusted absolutely. A records request attached to the civil proceedings, which Dermott had fought and lost. She had researched this before Daniel made the call, before I'd been put out on the porch. She had found the information, formed the strategy, and then waited for the right moment. The suitcases on the porch were not an emotional reaction to an overwhelming situation. They were step 2 of a plan. The deposition took place in Ashworth's conference room, with its view of the Hillsborough River, which I had learned to use as a focal point when I needed to think. Dermott was present, a large man, with a lawyer's careful neutrality and expensive cufflinks. Jennifer was present. Daniel was present. A court reporter sat in the corner. Ashworth sat beside me. I had worn the charcoal blazer again. Dermott began with Jennifer. Her testimony was polished and organized. She described the household finances, Daniel's income, my contributions, the years I had lived with them. She was careful and controlled, and she maintained her composure through the first 40 minutes with the efficiency of a woman who had rehearsed this too. Then Ashworth began his cross-examination. He was quiet and methodical, and he started far from the destination he was heading toward. He asked about household routines. He asked about the grocery account, whether she and Daniel maintained a joint grocery account, yes or no. They did. Whether I contributed to that account. She said yes. Whether I contributed in cash or digitally. She paused. Digitally, she said. He asked her to specify which account received my digital contributions. She named Daniel's personal account. Not the joint grocery account, Ashworth said. A fractional hesitation. They're Daniel transfers funds. When you say Daniel transfers funds, you mean from his personal account to the joint account. Yes. So Mrs. Collins's contributions entered Daniel's personal account first, not the joint household account. That's effectively the same thing. Is it? He let the question breathe. Then he moved to the surveillance footage, which had been entered as an exhibit. He asked Jennifer if she had accompanied Mrs. Collins to the Publix on Gulf to Bay Boulevard on the Thursday in question. She had not. He asked if she had given Mrs. Collins cash or a card for groceries that day. She said that Margaret sometimes used household funds. He asked if she could provide documentation of any such fund transfer on that date or within the 3 days prior. She said she'd have to check. He noted for the record that no such documentation had been produced in discovery. Then he said very calmly, "Miss Collins, can you tell me what you were doing at 8:42 p.m. on the Saturday evening before your husband called the Florida lottery?" The room changed. It was subtle, the way pressure changes before a storm. Nothing dramatic, just a shift in the quality of air. I don't recall specifically," she said. Ashworth placed a document in front of her. "I'm showing you Exhibit 14, a record of internet searches conducted from a device registered in your name." He read the search term aloud. He read the timestamp. He looked at her across the table with the patience of a man who has been here before and knows exactly how long it takes. Jennifer looked at the document. She looked at Dermot. She looked at Daniel. In the space of those 3 glances, I saw the entire architecture of her plan. The strategy, the research, the performance, the coffee cup from Morning Tide, the settlement document folded in thirds, crack from load-bearing wall to surface detail. She started. "I was looking up. We were concerned about what the—" She stopped, started again. "I was trying to understand the situation." "Before the situation existed?" Ashworth asked quietly. Dermot said, "Objection." And Ashworth said, with great politeness, that he was simply asking for clarification, and the court reporter typed. And Daniel looked at his hands, and Jennifer sat with the expression of a woman watching a building fall that she had spent months constructing. There was no dramatic outburst. That's not how these things end. What happened was quieter and more complete than that. Jennifer's narrative, the overwhelmed family, the shared household, the innocent shock, could not survive a timestamp. She had researched ownership law the night before Daniel made the phone call, which meant she had known before the call what she was attempting, which meant the entire framework of family misunderstanding was a construction, not a description. I sat in the charcoal blazer and looked at the Hillsborough River and said nothing. I didn't need to. The judge's ruling came on a Tuesday morning in February, and Ashworth called me at 9:15 to read me the relevant paragraph, which I have since memorized. The evidence presented establishes, by a preponderance of evidence, that the lottery ticket bearing draw number 847-MF was purchased by Margaret E. Collins using personal funds drawn from her individual account, at a location and time consistent with her documented movements, with no evidence of contribution, direction, or joint intent from any other party. The ticket is the sole property of Margaret E. Collins. The injunction is hereby made permanent. The counterclaim is dismissed. Dismissed. Not reduced, not compromised, not settled at a number that anyone in a restaurant had decided was appropriate for my care and comfort. Dismissed. I was sitting in a coffee shop when Ashworth called, a place called Harbor Grounds that I had found in my 4th week at the motel, and that had become something like a headquarters. I put down my cup and looked out at the water and let the sentence complete itself in my mind a few times. The ticket is the sole property of Margaret E. Collins. $45,200,000. My name. The Lottery Commission had already confirmed the processing details. After the mandatory lump sum/annuity election, I chose the lump sum because I was 68, and Gerald had taught me not to count on installments. And after federal and state taxes, the amount that would arrive in my newly established individual account at a bank I had chosen, specifically because neither Daniel nor Jennifer had ever banked, there was $26,400,000. I sat in Harbor Grounds and had a second cup of coffee, and I let it be ordinary for a moment. Just a woman, a cup of coffee, a window. Then I called Linda. She didn't speak for several seconds. Then she said, "Margie," with the particular emphasis of a 60-year-old friendship, the kind that contains an entire history in a single inflection. "Yes," I said. She laughed, and I laughed. And two people at the next table looked over with the mild curiosity of people witnessing a happiness they can't explain. There were practical consequences for Daniel and Jennifer that I will describe with the factual care they deserve. Dermot had filed the counterclaim aggressively, which meant its dismissal came with a cost award. They were ordered to pay a portion of my legal fees, which were substantial. Dermot's own fees, which I was told were considerable, were entirely their responsibility. The legal action had taken nearly 5 months and generated the kind of paper trail and public record that attaches to a person in the way that ink attaches to fabric, indelibly. Daniel had, during the proceedings, been deposed himself. His testimony had not served him well. He had admitted to photographing the ticket numbers before I was asked to leave, which suggested premeditation rather than impulse. He had admitted that his Sunday morning call to the lottery had been made without informing me. Under Ashworth's quiet, methodical questioning, the story of an overwhelmed son acting in a moment of shock had not held its shape. I did not feel triumphant about Daniel. I want to be honest about that too. I felt something more complicated. A grief with firm edges, the kind you know won't soften entirely. The kind you eventually make space for, rather than resolve. He was my son. He had looked at the lemon tree. Those two facts would always exist in tension, and I had accepted that they would. Jennifer faced a separate consequence I had not anticipated and had not sought. Her employer, the medical billing company, conducted an internal review when the civil case generated local press coverage. The review found several discrepancies in billing practices associated with her account. Nothing that the civil case had touched, but the scrutiny the case brought had turned over rocks that might otherwise have stayed in place. She was placed on administrative leave in March. I learned this from Linda, who had been following the local court records with the thoroughness of a retired school teacher who had never lost her habit of research. I did not feel triumphant about that either, but I did not feel sorry. The day the funds cleared, a Thursday in March, nearly 5 months to the day after I had fed $7 into a lottery machine at a Publix on Gulf to Bay Boulevard, I drove back to that Publix. I parked in the same spot I estimated I had used in October. I went inside and bought milk and bread and a small container of Greek yogurt, because some things deserve a closing parenthesis. And at the checkout, on impulse, I bought a scratch ticket. I won $4. I laughed all the way to my car. By April, I had a home. Not a condo selected by Jennifer's careful eye for other people's limitations. A 2-story Craftsman in St. Petersburg, 6 blocks from the water, with a porch that ran the full width of the front, and a backyard with a fig tree and 2 raised garden beds. The house had 4 bedrooms. I needed one for myself, one for a study, one for Linda's visits. I painted it the blue of the Gulf on a clear morning, and left the 4th empty, because some spaces need to be empty before you know what to put in them. I hired a financial advisor named Constance Braley, and together we built a framework, a trust, an investment portfolio, a charitable giving account for causes I had supported quietly for years and could now support without being quiet. The local library, a literacy program in Pinellas County, a scholarship fund at the Columbus School where I had taught for 30 years. I bought good boots because my feet had suffered long enough, and that struck me as the proper first extravagance of a woman who had earned the right. Linda came in April and helped me unpack. We arranged the kitchen the way I wanted it, put a radio on the windowsill, and ate takeout Thai food on the living room floor. "This is your house," she said, looking around. "How does it feel?" I thought about it honestly, like a sentence that ends correctly. I volunteered Wednesday afternoons at an adult literacy program, helping a 41-year-old named Marcus work toward his GED. By August, he read me the first paragraph of his completed essay, and I was prouder of that than of almost anything else that year. As for Daniel and Jennifer, the legal fees had required refinancing the house on Pelican Drive at an unfavorable rate. Daniel lost a major insurance client in the quiet way business is sometimes lost, without explanation. Jennifer's administrative leave became a termination by May. The billing discrepancies had not survived a compliance review. She was working, I was told, as a medical office coordinator at a clinic in Clearwater. They were still together. That surprised me, and then didn't. People of a certain type stay because leaving requires confronting what you've done alone. I turned 69 in June. Linda drove up. Constance brought wine. Barbara from the walking group brought a cake. And we sat on the porch as the sun went down over the rooftops. Marcus sent a card. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Collins. Thank you for everything." He had addressed it in his new handwriting. Careful, large, getting better every week. I put it on the windowsill next to the radio. Some things you keep where you can see them. They mistook my patience for weakness, my quietness for ignorance, my age for irrelevance. And they forgot the most basic rule of a long life. The person who says least often knows most. I didn't win because of the money. I won because I kept my name on what was mine and refused to be moved from the truth. What would you have done? Standing on that porch, watching your suitcases in the humidity? Would you have taken the settlement? Kept the peace? I'd love to know. Leave a comment below. Share this story if it reached you. And thank you, truly, for listening.